So we are still here. Your Valentine to sort of 70s Euro trashy gore, really. So where does that come from, that love?
I grew up in rural Montana, kind of the middle of absolute nowhere in the U.S., and I had no knowledge of the outside world. So I was very excited when I discovered genre films at a young age, and I just kind of dove into the video store, and I immediately felt this affinity toward like Italian Euro horror in particular, like Fulci and Argento and things like that. And while I really enjoyed like the stylized cinema of Argento, there was something about kind of this trashy, surreal thing that Fulci was doing that it just kind of drew me in.
So how does a boy from Montana become a a PR for like a film company?
Well,
how did that happen?
I just grew up loving films, and so while I was still living in Montana, when I was going to university, I kind of just started making movies. At the dawn of the internet in the late 90s, I started reaching out to filmmakers and, just seeing if anyone wanted to work with me. And, as somebody who'd never really, gotten his toes wet. And I was able to actually find some filmmakers, mostly in Europe, who took a chance on some screenplays. And my first produced screenplay was in 2001, and thankfully that was before the digital revolution, and I was able to kind of get an IMDb page before everyone else, and I was able to stack it full of a bunch of titles, and I just kind of kept making a go of it, and I made a bunch of bargain bin horror movies for years and years, kind of remotely out of Montana. And when I moved to New York 7 years ago, I thought, I'm in New York, it's the big city, I'm about to start making the big features. And then I realized I was a very small fish in a giant pond, and I thought, well, how do you get your foot in the door? And somebody said, well, try publicity. That's, you're chatty. Through my PR work, I ended up co-writing a really big Korean action movie. It was actually the biggest budgeted Korean film of all time when it was made, called The Berlin File. Most folks haven't heard of it, but it was a huge hit. It opened theatrically in the U.S., and that thankfully opened a lot of doors for me.
And you were the publicist on Your Next, which is where you met Barbara Crampton.
Correct.
Of course. So you've always been a fan.
I have since my early since a time when I should not have been watching that scene in Reanimator. So no, I've been a fan of Barbara's forever, and I've always been a huge fanboy. And when the time came to work on Your Next, there were all these amazing people in the film, and the only one I wanted to meet immediately was Barbara, and I just basically ran up to her and tried my best to just avoid gushing. And we remained close friends. That was almost 5 years ago or so, and we just remained extremely close ever since. And she was gracious enough to be in the film. I mean, thankfully she loved the script. But
well, you wrote it for her, didn't you?
I did. I had written it with her in mind.
Two things kept coming up from every Q&A that we did, and one was that it was like mature people for a change rather than stupid screaming teenagers, and the second one was it was set in winter, which is, and in the daylight, which is unusual. So talk about those a bit.
Sure. The idea, even when writing it, was I wanted it to be a mature group of people making adult decisions, even if those decisions are massively wrong. And that's just kind of a throwback again to like a lot of the films that I grew up watching, especially in the 70s. I feel like, the dawn of the slasher really kind of lowered the median age of horror stars, because it started really being about like sex and violence. And so you wanted these hot teens and 20-somethings. And a lot of these like more mature actors who had made amazing names for themselves in the genre kind of didn't really have a place anymore in this. So the idea was to go back to that and really make a film about adults. Even the two kids who show up in We Are Still Here and are promptly knocked off is kind of my kind of fun way of saying like, no, this is doubly proof that this movie is not about the kids.
It's like Gregory Peck in The Omen, or George C. Scott in The Change.
Absolutely, those are both
Lee J. Cobb
examples.
in The Exorcist.
Absolutely, yeah.
You're right. It does have that tradition, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas now,
yeah, absolutely.
It's the flavour of the TV month.
Sure, and you think about the big names in horror now, and most of them are kind of these young scream queeny sort of people, which are fine and perfectly fun, and I enjoy those films. But you think about the horror greats, and they're all old men. You know, like, and even when they were famous, they were old men. It's like the Vincent Prices and the Bela Lugosi's. Like, there's no home for those people in modern cinema, you know, and the idea with this was just, there are still all these amazing actors who are still working or are no longer working who can just own these movies, and this movie is kind of for them. I mean, and I'm very grateful that my preconceived notion of people not caring at all about that is true. There, of course, was that fear of like, oh, you know, if we put all 50-somethings in this movie and the central villain's 82 years old, like, are kids going to want to watch this? And it's like, absolutely. Like, not only do they want to watch it, but like, they don't even think about it. Because I didn't think about it growing up as a kid. You know, like watching these films, like, look at Reanimator, look at From Beyond, two films that, you know, both star Barbara from my film, but also, you know, Stuart Gordon, you know, his fingerprints are kind of all over We Are Still Here as well, you know, just in that I grew up with those films. Both those movies are about medical students. They're about psychiatrists. They're about smart, educated people making what they believe are smart decisions. We don't do that anymore, you know. Like, I think we seem to embrace this stupid reality TV sort of culture where we almost cheer when people make idiotic decisions, and I'm just not a fan of that. So that's in a nutshell the idea behind why we have adults in the movie. And in terms of the wintry daytime setting was just the idea of embracing something that's not traditionally seen in genre films, but not only that, but really not seen in like budget-minded genre films. I mean, you think of horror films that are set in the snow, and it's like The Shining and, you know, The Thing and things like that. Also films that I tend to find that whenever you use the snow, you really shoot in the day a lot. I mean, The Shining's a great example, and The Thing is another great example. Because if you're going to put yourself in that much misery to shoot a movie in like that agonizing cold, you want to show it off. And for us, there were actually scenes in the script that were set at night, and we thought like, oh, wouldn't it be great if during the scene the windows are open and you can see those snowbanks outside? And we said, absolutely, absolutely. It feels colder, it feels more desolate. And I really like the juxtaposition of, you know, you have this kind of smoldering jet black Dagmar family that's haunting this sad couple, and it's almost more jarring to see them show up in the middle of the afternoon. You know, it's like a time of day that we think is safe. You know, kids aren't scared at 3 p.m. So the idea of, I mean, the final sort of, you know, wild 20 minutes of the movie, they're set around noon-ish. I mean, you know, that day starts with them having breakfast, and they say, we'll be back in an hour, and by the time they come back, all hell is broken loose. So really, the climax of the film is set during this seemingly safe time of day, and I think that's a lot of fun. Again, sure. It's, you know, it's kind of does something a little different. So,
so last question, I mean, was the reality of your making your feature debut everything you wanted it to be?
It was. Yeah, I had a really wonderful time making the film. I think that it's due in no small part to the fact that I had incredible producers, you know, who stepped in and really stood up for me and said, like, this is going to be something special and this is going to be something different. And they believed in this weird vision I had for the film. I mean, it's not often that you can go up to people and say, I want to make this weird homage to 70s Euro horror / made-for-TV movies / melodrama, and have them go, that could work, you know? And so I'm extremely grateful for that, but not only that, but the fact that I was able to work with so many of my friends. You know, not only Barbara and Larry, but, you know, my producer Travis Stevens is one of my dearest friends. My special effects team were all people I've worked with for the past 15 years, and I consider family. My director of photography, Kareem Hussein, is a very dear friend of mine. So there is something very reassuring when you take that first trembling step onto your first set as a director, and you look around the room and you realize that virtually everyone there knows and loves you already, and you've got a lot of people there who have your back. So I mean, I think the film, for everything people love about it, is due in no small part, not just to me and my vision, but to the team I had. I mean, it wouldn't be anything without them.